and welcome to On the Trail. I am your host, Miles James Dean. The evening before September 22nd, day one, was uneventful. I stayed pretty much to myself and subdued all emotions with thoughtful conviction of the three essential elements to the success of the journey as they were imprinted in my psyche. My unyielding belief in the mission itself, the care I had given to the horses, and although briefly alluded to in my previous episode, my conviction that there was a spiritual aspect connected to the journey. And it is that element upon which I now wish to elaborate. Most noteworthy is that 2 weeks prior to the departure date, I didn't have the horse trailer. I didn't have the camera to film the interviews, and the website was still in the process of being redesigned by a third website developer. Even though I had been trying for months to negotiate for all that was required, those critical items were still missing, but it was within those same 2 weeks that something, for lack of a better word, let's say something miraculously strange began to happen that, when finally connecting the dots, gave me the understanding, not just the impression, but the understanding that everything that was missing would be in place on day one. I don't want to get ahead of myself in this series, but for you to understand what was about to unveil itself, I must share a little anecdote about what happened to me on my first adventure traveling up onto the Alaskan highway by motorcycle in an attempt to reach Fairbanks, Alaska. In a nutshell, I had a companion who felt that because of my neglect for my own security and my failure to even understand the importance of it, made various attempts to discourage and dissuade me from continuing the path to what I now know would have been my final destination. That is to say, that had I gone any further up the Alaskan highway than I did, would have ended my life. The several attempts that were made to avoid my reaching that final destination came in several ways, and with each I faltered, regained my unwavering, determined spirit, and kept pressing on until eventually the unthinkable happened. The unthinkable is what you will hear about when the next series begins. But the point is this. At the time, I couldn't understand what was happening, and it wasn't until 28 years later, just before I took off for the horseback ride across America, that I finally connected the dots. On September the 7th, I was scheduled to have an interview with a Native American and follow up by traveling into New York to conduct an interview with Dr. Leonard Jeffries of City College. Even though I didn't have the video equipment, I was optimistic that a deal I was working on would give me possession of the equipment in time for the interview. On the 5th of September, just 2 days prior to the interview, not only did the negotiation for obtaining the equipment fall through, but the person whom I was to interview canceled. Now, one could argue that the timing of the two was perfect. I couldn't conduct an interview without a camera, so while the cancellation of the equipment and the cancellation by the interviewee could be viewed as one thing canceling out the other, it still didn't alter the significance of the interview. The interview with the Native American was of significance to the indigenous story I wanted to share while on the journey. The cancellation came in a phone call while I was sitting in McDonald's just after returning from the broken deal in New York. So on top of the anxiety from the deal falling apart, I now had to deal with indigestion. After a few moments of time trying to digest it all, I glanced over, and sitting at a table was a man wearing Native American jewelry, and a conversation ensued. It turned out he was a Native American, and long story short, agreed to be interviewed. I had two thoughts. One, that it was a strange coincidence, and two, that I would have to resign myself to filming with whatever unprofessional equipment I owned. Then, the very next day, I received a phone call. It was from Rayner, someone I did not know and had never spoken to, and who said he had heard of the undertaking I was planning and wanted to offer his assistance. And then he shockingly said, "I'm a filmmaker." What in the world was going on? Another coincidence? The dots were circling but had not yet connected until within days of each other. My sister Wanda offered to help with the down payment for the horse trailer, and an unsolicited phone call from Joyce, a friend, who offered to make a huge contribution by co-signing for the purchase of the trailer. All of this out of nowhere had to have come from somewhere. And the dots that fell into place were the dots that connected the horseback journey to the motorcycle journey, in that, as with each, every setback, whether known or unforeseen, would mysteriously straighten itself out. And the only the only difference between then and now was that now I was paying attention. I had come to the realization that I had on the last journey, and would now once again have on this journey, a divine interventionist. Yes, it was obvious to me that the spirit of my ancestor, whom I was dedicating the horseback ride by highlighting throughout the journey their achievements and contributions to making America great during the time when the horse was the major mode of transportation, the spirit of those who came before were all in on the journey, and they were there to assist me. In fact, I believe they were in on it from the very conception of the journey, if not before. In my heart of hearts, I knew that on my quest to go beyond the limitations of boundaries, seeking yet another adventure, and this one in their honor, was a joint venture, and nothing would stop us. Ladies and gentlemen, I suppose there are other ways one can interpret what was happening, but I truly believe it was divine intervention that saved my life before. And for what purpose? Who knew that 28 years later, I would undertake this mission? Furthermore, what happened on day one only reinforced my belief. Joyce from California was hired to be my driver and photographer in the absence of Rayner, who could not take the time to travel with us, yet would periodically join us along the route. She flew in to New Jersey a few days before the departure date, and we began loading the supplies into the trailer. And on the morning of the 22nd, we loaded Blaze and Sankofa into the horse trailer, and I sat in the passenger seat, and Joyce drove us to New York City. This was the first time she got behind the wheel of my 3500 Dodge Dually pickup that towed the 35-foot three-horse trailer, and my first opportunity to witness her abilities of handling the rig. All I knew about her abilities was what she told me in our phone conversations about her driving trailers for FedEx. What I found out for myself was that she was quite capable of handling the rig. September 22nd was chosen as the departure date because, having previously traveled or taken a road trip to Las Cruces, New Mexico in the month of May, I knew that it would be physically dangerous for the health of the horses and myself to travel through the deserts of New Mexico, Arizona, and Eastern California at any measurable speed and for any measurable distance in the summer. I needed to be across those deserts before the heat arrived in the month of April. Additionally, it would be equally challenging riding in the cold months of November through February on the East Coast. So my plan was to begin the East Coast trek from New York City in September while still moderately warm and ride through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and into Washington, D.C. within the first 28 days. If I could do that, then the remaining states between D.C. and New Mexico would have moderate temperatures. The interview with Dr. Jeffries of City College in New York, the first of several historians to be interviewed during the journey, was ready to be posted on the website. If you recall, each state through which I would travel, a commentary or theme reflecting either the contributions by Black Americans or the indigenous peoples to America's land entitlement would be posted on the website. Dr. Jeffries' New York interview entitled "They Built the Wall" referred to the fact that it was African slaves who had built Wall Street and the trails leading up into Harlem. That interview can be seen on my YouTube channel. Another purpose for the website was to keep the public informed of my encounters and whereabouts while on the trail, and to encourage sponsorship and donations along the way. The actual promotion of the journey had begun months before with the assistance of radio and talk show host Kamau Kalafani. Using his platform, WBAI 99.5 FM radio station, a listener-supported station located in New York City. Kamau invited me on his show entitled Under the Learning Tree for several on-air interviews leading up to the start of the journey. Kamau was not only a radio host, but also he was a community activist and a Yoruba priest, and it was he who performed a libation to the ancestors in New York City at the African burial ground. It was there that my trek across America began, with the purpose of seeking my ancestors' blessings in a ceremonial way. It was a perfect morning with sunny skies. Again, a warm temperature as I and a procession of well-wishers consisting of my vice principal, Miss Charity Haygood, a few students from my elementary school, and of course, cowboys and cowgirls were all led into the site of the sacred burial ground by the Yoruba priests. The libation began in the traditional manner of pouring water onto the earth, as you saw, and the offering seeking the blessings of the ancestors. After the ceremony ended, a wonderful thing happened. Seemingly out of nowhere, it began to drizzle, and everyone stopped as the priest raised his hand, saying, "The ancestors have heard us, and they are now showering us with their blessings." Now, I don't really know what others were thinking, but I'm sure that you know what I was thinking. I led the procession on horseback to the New York City waterfront as I was told in advance that Blaze, whom I decided to ride first, excuse me, would not be able to walk through the Holland Tunnel, nor could he be carried across the Hudson River by boat or ferry. So Joyce and I planned to rendezvous on the other side, across from New York, in Liberty State Park in Jersey City, New Jersey. And 30 minutes later, like clockwork, she was there waiting. Using road maps, we had planned the route perfectly, and Sankofa was also patiently waiting for me. Our destination for the night was the home of my parents, who lived in the South Ward of Newark, New Jersey, and required that I ride through the downtown section of New Jersey, or of Newark. It would take about 6 hours to ride the miles at a walk. I didn't want to lope on the asphalt, even though Sankofa wore his rubberized boots to absorb the shock of the hard surface. And that's because I felt it better to use discretion and only lope on the city streets when absolutely necessary. I also knew that I could reach my parents' home before dusk and in time to rest for the night. Now, Jersey City was a border city to Newark, and within an hour, I had reached the downtown section of the city. Newark was my hometown. I grew up there. I was teaching there. I had done a lot of parades on horseback in the city, and the city had a mounted patrol unit. So seeing a horseman riding through this city was not an odd sight to see. So there was no fanfare awaiting me, and no group of well-wishers had gathered to cheer me on my way, and I didn't expect them. What did warm my heart and offer a sense of security were the two people who had been waiting patiently for me to enter the city, and who escorted me through most of the downtown area. My daughter, Brianna. There you see her walking beside, there you see her walking beside me. And on the other side, the police escort. As expected, I arrived at my parents' home before dusk, and the home was filled with nieces and cousins and friends, and of course the matriarch of the family, my mother. The next morning was to begin the ride south toward Washington, D.C. And the plan was to stop that evening at my home in Piscataway, New Jersey, which was approximately 24 miles away. The decision was to ride on Route 22, which is a U.S. interstate highway. At the time, and I believe even up until today, the nickname for that Route 22 is Suicide Highway. The other option was to take a route through several towns and town centers, which would take from 8 to 10 hours of navigating the city congestion while responding at the same time to the many questions from the townspeople that I would encounter. I had done my homework and found out what roads and highways had laws still on the books for horse travel, and decided to take the much more direct route down Suicide Highway. To me, it offered enough shoulder on the highway where I would be able to ride safely, and since it was a highway, there would be fewer encounters with pedestrians, and I could make it in 6 hours, only stopping for the red lights. I waited until around 10 a.m. to depart, hoping that the rush hour traffic would have subsided to a minimum, and made my way onto the highway. Within minutes, I was pulled over by a state trooper and asked to vacate the highway. Well, I told him that I corrected him actually and told him that horses were allowed. And then he corrected me and told me that horses weren't allowed. And finally, after several corrections, he made a phone call. And 3 hours later, I was on my way with him as an escort. At first, I couldn't understand why it took so long to verify that horses had the same rights as automobiles to travel on that highway, only to later find out why it did take so long. And that was the coordination that was taking place. You see, I had to travel through 8 different cities along Route 22 before reaching Piscataway, and the police had coordinated with each city along the route so that at the point of entry, a police patrol car was waiting to escort me through that portion of Route 22, which was in their jurisdiction. Because of the 3-hour delay and these escorts, I was able to ride into the dark of the night and reach my home in Piscataway just after 7 p.m. There, you see me riding into the night, and you see behind me the police car. Let me say this. The support I received from local and state police was astonishing. And the way they took care of me in New Jersey was the way they took care of me in every state I entered. It was a true testament to their motto, which is to protect and to serve. We spent 2 days in Piscataway waiting for the arrival of a 40-gallon water tank that was late in delivery, ordered previously. This water tank would be used as the primary source for the water for the horses, and the rest areas would be the secondary source. The next morning, we headed south toward Trenton, New Jersey. I rode on a towpath that was accessible not far from my home, and it ran alongside the Delaware Raritan Canal, while Joyce drove through the streets adjacent to the canal. We rendezvoused every 10 miles where we would water the horses and I would change mounts if necessary. At some of those entry points into the towpath from the city roads, there were parking lots that made it more convenient to work with the animals and to park the truck and trailer. The towpath had mileage markers, and it was on this initial path that I was able to compare the distances that each horse would travel in an hour, and Sankofa was far outpacing Blaze. Sankofa was able to lope on the surface floor of the towpath at 8 miles per hour, while Blaze, who was anxious and still uncertain of his role in this odyssey, hadn't relaxed or smoothed out his gait at the lope, and therefore gave me a quick and comfortable lope, which in turn caused me to resort to walking him most of the time, only covering a distance of 4 miles per hour. I did cover the full 33 miles that got us into Trenton that day, but 29 of those miles were ridden on Sankofa. Departing from the towpath put me very close to the Calhoun Bridge in the city of Trenton, where we had planned to cross into Pennsylvania. But another hurdle needed to be crossed, and that was the authorities prohibited crossing the bridge on horseback, compounded by a vehicle weight restriction on the bridge, which the truck and trailer did exceed. Let me show you the bridge. If you look closely, you could see the weight limit of 3 tons. And also to the right, you can see a sign that said horses are prohibited. You see, it was a narrow bridge as well, and you see it crossing the river there, going into Pennsylvania. The plan was to travel on Route 1 once I had crossed into Pennsylvania, which was a direct route to Cheney University, which would be the first of several HBCUs, or historical black colleges and universities, that I had planned to visit. And the Calhoun Bridge, again, being the closest to Route 1, was the bridge that was the best one to cross. The bridge authorities, well, they were insistent up to the point that they weren't, and eventually held up the traffic at both ends of the bridge for us to cross. Police protecting. Now we were in Pennsylvania, and our next episode will begin my traveling through Pennsylvania, going into Philadelphia. And I'll tell you about who laid out the red carpet and the green grass along the way. Please don't forget to hit that subscription button to be notified of the next podcast. And if you like the podcast, hit that like button as well. Invite your friends also. So until the next podcast, the next episode, The Trail. Happy trails to you. Until we meet again.